balance it out here. Good afternoon, good morning, it's getting in tonight. My name's Eric, this is Jeremy, this is Gawi, and this is Shayan. And we're going to talk to you about renewable energy deployment and mitigating energy poverty in the global south. And the title of our presentation is called Igniting Change, a Global Framework to Accelerate the Deployment of Renewable Energy in the Global South.
Oh, just click the side button. And, no.
Oh, okay, I see.
There you go.
First day. Okay, so during the presentation, we're going to lay out a context, kind of show you where we're coming from, our worldview. And then we're going to move into our kind of main talking points. So we're going to set a kind of setting an energy agenda, lay the foundations for success, and then unleash the power of the markets. So here's our context. Energy demand is increasing in the global south. So you have all these tiger economies, you have China, and there's parts of Africa, Southeast Asia. So people are increasing their standard of living and they're demanding more energy. So you can see in 1990, billion kilowatts, not a lot going on. But where we are today around here, there's a lot more. And by the time we're in 2030, we're going to be talking 20,000 billion kilowatts. So, and that's going to be coming from nuclear, gas, coal, hydro. So renewable energy is going to be part of that mix. It's going to be a key component, but it's not going to be the only component. You're still going to have the nuclears and the hydrocarbons adding to it. But interestingly enough, you can see in this graph that this purple representing the global north and the darker purple representing the global south. The global south has actually began to overtake the global north in renewable energy investment. So this has largely been driven by China, but you can see how that's going to become key. So renewable energy deployment is not growing fast enough, especially for people that are living in this energy poverty. Not everyone's benefiting. Fossil fuels remain the dominant energy mix throughout the world. 1.6 billion people do not have access to electricity. That's 25% of the population. And there's a wide disparity of growth. And you can see that in this chloropleth map. So you have places like North America, Europe, Scandinavia, Australia. These places are consuming a great deal of energy. Tens of thousands of kilowatt hours per capita in 2007 when this data was collected. Then you have other countries in the global south. You have the developing ones like Brazil and China, which are starting to increase their energy consumption, but then you have the laggers behind. Throughout Africa, sub-Saharan, as well as parts of North Africa, throughout South Asia, through Southeast Asia, and as well as in Central Africa, where it's been too unstable for data to even be collected. So our global framework consists of three key portions. There's setting the energy agendas, laying the foundations for success, and understanding the power of markets. And they're not in a hierarchical order. They're going to be deployed parallel.
So the first component that we have is setting the energy agenda, and this encompasses two of the focus areas that we address, stakeholders and education. So if we look at identifying stakeholders, it's important to realize that we have the international level, which incorporates people such as the UNDP, World Bank, World Health Organization, UNICEF, and UNESCO. Then we have the national level, so government heads, ministries such as health, education, environment, agriculture, and defense. Then industry and central banks. And at the local level, we have municipal governments, utilities, local NGOs, and individuals themselves. And we can see that global civil society and the private sector transcend across all three. So the main purpose of identifying the stakeholders is to see who we need to target in our framework and who the policies would be targeted at. So energy is central to the core of their missions, and this is a key component of our framework, as it goes on the premise that we want to promote to the stakeholders how they are directly affected by energy sustainability and how they can benefit by changing their strategies or shifting towards clean energy, which leads to investment for them. So one example that we have is healthcare. they are directly affected by energy in the sense that clinics, surgeries, all the equipment which they run on are kind of tied in with energy. So if they adopt practices that are more efficient, their ultimate goals that they have are also benefited. Another example that we have is women empowerment, and this kind of shows the link between energy and development economics and other factors that contribute and play a part with energy. For example, women often have to go and collect biomass for cooking or heating or whatever else they might need to use, and that means that they're unable to spend time gaining technical capacity or engaging in other sources of things that can increase their standard of living, as well as clean energy. So there's two things that can be benefited by things such as initiatives looking at the clean cooking stoves. One would be personal enrichment of the women and other people in their community, increasing the standard of living, as well as that there would be environmental benefits shifting from biomass to clean energy. So that basically shows that by promoting how one can be better off themselves, they'll be more likely to follow such a policy or initiative.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about laying the foundation for success. And 3 focus areas that sort of fall under this area is knowledge transfer, government incentives, and business environment. Essentially, international development and renewable energy deployment require a lot more than just sending a wind turbine or a solar panel into a developing country. There's a certain amount of renewable energy or investment that any developing country can accept at a certain rate and actually deploy and use. And if you're going to deploy renewable energy technologies, you need to be able to essentially have a strong labor pool, a strong understanding of the local conditions, skilled labor in order to implement these sort of technologies. So, yeah, like I'm saying, deployment of renewable energy requires regulatory, policy, financial, and market frameworks and technical expertise, but these don't just arrive in a vacuum. In many developing countries, you need to build these. You need to have capacity building, and there's a lot of multilateral, regional, bilateral institutions that are emerging in order to help with knowledge transfer so that developing countries can use these technologies. So looking at a local level, you have to understand what the current situation is and what are the local and geographic ranges, like what sort of technologies might actually work. You have to gather data in order to do resource mapping, see, is wind going to work here, or is solar going to work here, is geothermal going to work here? Decision making really requires a strong foundation of data and science. In order to make a good decision, you have to have that data first, and to get that data, you need to build capacity. An enabling environment really is about policy support. It's about different government incentives. So be they a subsidy or a tax, different kind of incentives are going to work differently in different countries and different areas. So you have to understand what's actually going to work. You have to engage people and get them involved. And so that's really like a cycle of building capacity, knowledge transfer, in order to accelerate deployment renewable energy. Now, one thing that we heard about earlier today is that interdisciplinary education and research is starting to take off within North America and Europe. I'm really happy to be here because we're at the University of Calgary. I'm not a student here, but it's interesting how they are creating these interdisciplinary research institutes, educating the next generation of businessmen and policymakers in order to understand the importance of energy in a whole bunch of business sectors. So really, training the next generation is basically the foundation for growth of renewable energy in developing countries. And unleashing the power of markets.
Thank you, Jeremy. We're going to talk about unleashing the power of markets, and one of the things I'm going to talk about is technology deployment and development, because that's a big issue, obviously, right now. I'm also going to talk about the financing, the risk involved, something called grid parity, and how it's affected different regions of the world in deployment of renewable energy technology. So just before I start, I'm just going to give you an overview of what I'm talking about. One of the most important things in obviously renewable energy technology is the development and the the deployment, you need to drive down the cost, and this can only be done through like innovative research, innovative technology. You need to decrease risk. You need to increase financial flows, not just from the private sector, but from the public sector as well. And the diagram over here is something I'm going to talk about later with grid parity, with the falling prices of solar. So governance. So how can you institute good governance in the renewable energy sector? First and foremost, you have to deregulate the market. And we can see this happening in Western African countries where the energy sector is being privatized and private investment is being brought in from overseas, and they're decentralizing the market to involve more private investors. And there's also private-public partnerships. So when you have private-public partnerships, you actually reduce the cost, you reduce the risk involved, and when both parties are sharing the risk, you can actually have more investment and more opportunities coming into play. The third point is austerity politics. Now, austerity politics looks at long-term self-sufficiency. Most of the funds actually works on the SDIF fund, the SDTC fund. They talk about providing 40% to 30% of the funding, and the project innovator has to provide the remaining 60%. So they're looking at long-term sufficiency without providing a massive subsidies for a long period of time. And if this happens for a long time, actually leads to like bankruptcy, which we've seen in Europe and in Spain, where there's depleted the capital market. And I'm just going to talk about grid parity. Now, grid parity is when the amount of resources you spend into developing a renewable energy technology is less than the fossil fuel running. And once we go beyond the point of grid parity, which is the middle point, you actually see a rising demand, a lower cost. So just to conclude, our 3-point plan for global framework that we're going to accelerate the deployment of renewable energy technology is setting the energy agenda, laying the foundation for success, and conditioning of the market. So, if you have any questions.
Can you go back to that chart on grid parity? Kind of flew by that quickly. Can you help me understand?
Yeah. So actually, where we are right now in the world is pretty much here. We're burning coal and using nuclear as a base load for power generation. Now, in some parts of the world, like Denmark, where we have a high use of wind energy, they actually pass the point of parity. So in Denmark, 70% of the energy is from wind. But back in the 70s, during the oil crisis, when we just started looking into wind, we didn't really have the energy resources and the technological innovations to actually get efficiency from the wind turbines. But over the next 20, 30 years, we've seen innovations in composite materials and understanding wind energy, GIS mapping, and the resources. So we can apply all this knowledge into driving the cost of wind down. So right now, in most parts of the world where wind is being used in the States, in Denmark, in parts of Europe, they've gone past the point of grid parity. But in other parts of the world where the understanding of wind, for instance, is in like parts of Africa, nobody's going to use wind. They're still stuck in here.
So why does the cost of coal and oil have to go up? You're focusing on the cost of renewables coming down.
Yeah, when the cost of oil goes up, we're saying it's not necessarily the cost is going up. It's more like once the cost of renewables go down, the demand is going to go up, and the cost of renewables is going to go down. Now, the price may remain the same. It would be a straight line graph for coal and nuclear plants. But in some cases, we're just saying if the price of renewables go down, demand is going to go up, which displace in the long term the use of coal and nuclear.
Also, we are seeing, like on a long-term basis, we are seeing the price of coal and oil increasing, and it's increased significantly. We're seeing a lot of volatility in the oil market. So for any oil importing country, having resilience against that volatility is really important. So
you can get the cost of coal down to less than 8 cents a kilowatt hour by using renewables, or the cost of renewables down to less than 8 cents a kilowatt hour to match up with what coal produces.
Yes, we can do that.
You can.
Yeah. And I've actually seen that happen in Manitoba. We have worked in, and I'm currently working on some energy projects, and with the use of hydro turbines, we've actually the design of these turbines and the cost of implementation is actually less than using coal and oil and gas. This might not be done in other parts of the world, but in certain places in North America, this actually happens. But obviously, this is a relative graph. In other regions of the world, it might be a reverse graph. In North America, with the use of wind energy, for instance, I worked on a project where in Manitoba they were using the icing techniques for wind. Obviously, you can't use wind in most parts of Canada because of the cold climate. But in countries like Denmark, where 20% of the energy grid is being fed by wind energy offshore, it's definitely
What we do with the places where the wind doesn't blow, very consistent.
Well, we'll keep using what we have in the meantime till we find a solution for it, because that's always the option. And even right now, in places like Denmark, where they have wind, they still use a baseload, nuclear baseload and coal baseload, as we saw this morning from one of the speakers. So it's not necessarily, like one of them said, mitigation. It's more like adaptation and system integration of both renewable energy sources and oil and gas.
That's all the time we have for questions. Thanks for the presentation.